Okay, so we're going to get started with Redux. Now, one thing I would highly recommend is that you install the Redux DevTools in your browser, whether it's Chrome or Firefox or whatever, because this gives us an overall picture of our Redux store with all of our state, okay, and any state changes from component to component. So it's pretty much mandatory if you're working with Redux. So you can get that installed. You can see I already have it in Chrome. And now we're going to jump into our text editor. I'm just going to stop my npm run dev for a second, and we need to make sure we go to the front end to install the stuff that I'm about to install. You don't want to install Redux on your server, you want it on your front end. And there's a couple other packages that I want to install as well. So let's do npm install. So we want Redux, which is a state manager. And I just want to mention that Redux isn't part of React, and it's not specifically for React. You can use Redux on its own. You could use it with Angular or something like that, but it is commonly used with React. Now, the way that we basically have them work together is with a package called React-Redux. So you want to make sure you install that as well. Now, there's another extension called Redux Thunk, which basically allows us to, in our action creators, it allows us to make asynchronous requests, because we're going to have to talk to our server from those action creators, and this will make more sense when we're actually doing that. But you want to make sure you install this piece. It's basically a piece of middleware called Thunk. And we also want to install the Redux DevTools Extension. So extension, and this is because Redux DevTools, they don't work by default. You actually have to add a piece of code to set it up, and this makes it easy to do, is to just use this extension. So I think that's all we need for now. So let's go ahead and install, and again, make sure this is in your front end. And then the first step after you install all that stuff is to create your Redux store file. So in the source, directly in the source right here in the front end, we're going to create a file called store.js. And this is basically where we connect all of our reducers and any middleware, stuff like that. So I'm going to import, and this is going to come from Redux. There's a couple of things we want to bring in here. One is createStore, which does just what it says. It's a function to actually create your store. We also want combineReducers. Basically, we're going to have a bunch of reducers, and each reducer is going to handle a certain piece of functionality. So if we have, if we're fetching our products from the back end, we're going to have a reducer for product list, and it'll have a request part, a success if it's a successful response, and then it'll have a fail in case there's an error. And a lot of this stuff will make more sense when we're actually doing it. I think I said this before, Redux is one of the hardest things that I find to teach, especially without actually showing you. Now we also want to bring in apply middleware so that we can apply any middleware such as Thunk. Okay, and speaking of Thunk, we'll go ahead and bring that in. So import Thunk from Redux-Thunk. And to use the Redux DevTools extension, we want to import compose with DevTools, like that. And that's going to come from the Redux-DevTools extension. Now, as far as our store, we're going to call this this create store right here. So let's say const store, and let's set that to create store. And as far as what we need to pass in here, the first thing we need to pass in is our reducer. Now, up here, we're going to set const reducer, and this is where we use that combineReducer. And right now I'm just going to pass in an empty object because we don't have any reducers just yet. But when we do, we'll bring them in here and we'll add them to this combineReducers. The second thing we want to add is the initial state. And again, right now we're not going to have anything in that, so let's just define initial state to just an empty array for now. I'm sorry, an empty object. And if we want something to be loaded when the Redux store loads initially, we can put it in here as initial state. Now, third is going to be the middleware, although we're using the Redux DevTools extension. And I just want to show you, if I go to our application before I actually implement any of this, and I try to look at my Redux DevTools, it says no store found. Make sure you follow the instructions. And just make this a little smaller. And then you can go to the instructions page, and it shows you some stuff to add here in your createStore. Now, I don't want to have to add this. That's why I use the extension. So instead of doing that, we're going to go as a third argument here, and we're going to pass in compose with DevTools. And then in there, we pass in our apply middleware. Now, we're only using thunk, so we could just pass in thunk. However, what I like to do is have an array of middleware. So I'm going to pass in here with a spread operator middleware, and then we'll define that right here. So const middleware, and I'm going to set that to an array with just thunk. So it's just going to spread whatever is in here, it's going to pass in here. All right, so yeah, I think that's all we need for that. So let's go ahead and export our store. So export default store. And the way that we actually implement this into our application is through a provider. And that provider comes from React Redux. And we're going to go to our index.js, which is basically our entry point for React. And let's go right here and say import provider. And that's going to be from React-Redux. Okay, we also want to bring the store in because that has to be passed into the provider. So import the store from, and it's just ./store. So we want to bring those two things in, and then down here, we actually don't need this React strict mode, so I'm going to replace that with the provider because we have to wrap our app with it. And then, like I said, that takes in the store, so we're going to pass in that store file. All right, so let's save this. And do I have this running? No, I don't. So it's npm run dev. Oops. And let's see. Oh, I'm still in the front end. So we want to cd ... into the back end, and then npm run dev. Okay, so now we should see this change over here. We should be, yep. So that changed. Middleware is not a function. So in my store.js, oh, I put brackets in here. So this shouldn't be brackets because what we're doing is taking what's in here and spreading it in here. So it's just thunk. It's not thunk with brackets. So let's save that and go back, and now this shows, and over here you can see this is now working. So we'll be able to see all of our state. We don't have anything in here yet because we don't have any reducers. We don't have any reducers, we don't have any actions, we have nothing, we just have an empty store. But this is now working and our store is connected. So what we'll do in the next video is, instead of just fetching data right from the component in useEffect like we're doing now, we're going to fetch it through a Redux action and then pass the data down through state through a reducer.